Hello, everyone. This is Ted Check, Public Relations Manager for the International Foundation for Protection Officers. I'm here with Tom Conley. Tom is a past chairman of the board for the IFPO, and now he sits on the board of directors. He also has his own security company and out in the Midwest. And Tom, of course, has a wealth of knowledge, served in the military, served as a police officer. And Tom and I are going to discuss the unfortunate, the tragedy that occurred several weeks ago in, I believe it was the Houston, Texas area at a Travis Scott concert. For those of you who don't know, Travis Scott is a rapper, very, very popular. And so this, I believe this concert was attended by about at least 50,000 people. And from all that I've read and heard, there were a number of mistakes, failures that occurred security-wise, and that's what we're going to discuss. Not aside from the fact that they possibly didn't stop the show when that they had knowledge of that there was harm that was coming to a lot of the concert goers there. Aside from all that, there were security blunders that occurred, that then more than likely, exacerbated the injuries and the deaths. So, Tom, from what I'm reading, one of the things that one of the takeaways is that it appears as though there weren't any barriers, there weren't any physical barriers to kind of section the crowd off to prevent mass stampeding, which apparently is what occurred there. That there was just one big section for everyone, for thousands upon thousands of people. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes. Basically, my take on it is there was no plan. The plan was to sort of wing it, bring people in, put them all together, and collect the money and just hope nothing bad happens. So hope is a poor substitute strategy for proper risk management and security procedures. And that appears to be, unfortunately, exactly what happened here.
That's terrible. Yeah, so
it is.
Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, it is terrible. And the worst part, like many incidents we've seen over the years, I believe it was wholly preventable. And if a meteor comes down during a concert and kills a bunch of people, you can say that's horrible, and you'd be right, but it was not preventable. This was wholly, I believe, preventable, and that's a real shame. What do you say to the people who were injured, the families of the people who were killed? What do you say to those people? Well, I'm sorry your loved one died, and money was more important than planning. Horrible.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, from what I understand, as far as if you're going to set something up of this magnitude, you're going to want to have barriers up. You're going to want to section off the crowd so that you limit that type of stampeding. If people end up pushing, they can only push in a certain section. They can't. It's not from way from the back and pushing all the way to the front, where there's hundreds and hundreds of people that are being trampled. Yeah, because we know, I mean, that I believe there was at least 8 deaths. I've read that there may be even more, that people have since died who were hospitalized, and then yes, hundreds upon hundreds of injuries. So that was yes, one thing, was the the lack of barriers, but also it seemed to me that there weren't that security weren't in place. Security and medical personnel were not in the correct places. That they were. You want to have them. Correct me if I'm wrong. You want to have them spaced throughout the crowd. You want to have them in maybe like little kiosks, if you will, throughout. Especially if you're talking about 50,000 people.
Yeah. So one of the critical factors that you touched on is to have people sequestered off into areas. There's a phenomenon known as crowd inertia. And crowd inertia is when a crowd starts coming and then that exponential force, continues. And if you look at Newton's laws of motion, one of them is, things that are in motion will continue until acted upon by an outside force. And so once that force gets started, it's very, very difficult to stop. And that's one of the reasons why you have to have sections. So when that force starts, it can stop at a given point. This was just a mess because everybody was thrown into a pot. And so not only was this crowd inertia effect, pervasive, but there was nobody on overwatch, if you will. There was no security professional, no safety professional that could kind of look at the crowd and sort of, direct assets. I know one of the big complaints of the fire chief is there is no communications interoperability. Well, how many times have we heard that before and after 9/11? The cops and the firefighters couldn't talk to each other.
Right.
So you had this interoperability. When that's an easy problem to solve as a part of the planning, you have communications interoperability. So all the key stakeholders, both public and private, can talk to each other and communicate. So
right.
The reason you have a good plan is so that you maximize response time for anybody who has a problem, and you can call a hard stop if needed. During the Las Vegas shooting, I think it was Travis Tritt, that continued to sing for a little bit until they figured out that it was a shooting, and then everybody ran off stage, and there was nobody in charge to direct the crowd. So there has to be not only a proper plan, but there has to be policies to be able to intervene to stop the entertainment and address it so it doesn't become a mass casualty incident. And you do that at the beginning, not after a bunch of people have been trampled. So it's so the security plan were homemade stew that you just throw a bunch of stuff in and hope it tastes good when it's done. Only here we're dealing with people's safety and lives. So it really is just befuddling and frankly unconscionable in today's day and age with technology and the planning tools that are out there for risk management.
Yeah, I can tell you, because I live in York County, Pennsylvania, we have a fair that occurs every summer, and there is a tremendous amount of planning that is put into that. As far as law enforcement, as far as medical, and it all. I believe that they, it kind of. It's if they don't ascribe directly to the incident command system, which came out of 9/11 through the Department of Homeland Security. It's very similar to that, where you have an incident commander, and then everyone stems from that individual, and it's very methodical and uniform, and there's all sorts of contingencies that are planned for, and yeah, like you're saying, it sounds as though they didn't plan for anything in this one, just kind of threw up their hands and hoped for the best. Another thing that it seemed like was that they didn't have pathways to get to the crowd or to get people out of the crowd. I would guess that's another thing that they probably would want to do is to have those. You have portions of the crowd sectioned off, but then you would also want areas that are kept clear so you could get some type of vehicle in and out, like a four-wheeler or something.
Sure. So that would be a clear zone or a buffer zone between areas where people reside. You talk about NEMS, and you're absolutely positively right. My company was the first NEMS compliant private security agency in the United States, I think in the early 2000s. And we adopted the NEMS protocol so that we could operate seamlessly with our public sector partners, not only in the planning, but also on the response side should an event occur. And so if you follow the emergency support functions as a part of the NEMS protocol, for instance, communication is one of those, right? I think it's maybe ESF 11, but you know, that's your template, right? So it's a template for checking things off the list. Okay, do we have communications? Well, no, we don't. Okay, so what do we do to do that? If you do that on every level, it doesn't keep things from happening, but it minimizes bad events happening. And when they do happen, rapid response minimizes deaths and injuries. So when you the NEMS and the incident management system, you're absolutely positively spot on. You combine that with security and risk management best practices, and that's where you come up with a combination of tools and controls that allows you to configure the venue and run the venue in a way that people can have a good time, but also that you can minimize the chance of death and injury. And so the cluster blank that you saw occur is exactly as a result of planning. And if you, of course, like the old saying goes, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail by purpose or by default. And it's just amazing that that could happen. And I certainly don't want to criticize public safety, but they had to get some permit to do that. So wouldn't the fire chief, police chief, emergency manager have to write off on that?
One would think.
So I mean, I think public officials need to really take a look at the plans, when they bring people in, because it's public safety that has to clean up the mess. So they should have veto rights over if something's not properly planned, you don't get your permit, the event doesn't allow, events not allowed to occur because it's too high risk.
And we've since heard that that Travis Scott has been named in several lawsuits. It wouldn't surprise me if some of those officials were pulled into them as well. I know the promoter's been named in lawsuits, but yeah, like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if people also looked to the authorities who allowed it to happen.
I mean, they're going to sue everybody.
Say it again, Tom.
I'm sorry, Ted. Go ahead.
No, I was done.
After.
Go ahead, Tom.
Good. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, it wouldn't surprise me if the authorities, some of those authorities, might get pulled into a lawsuit as well.
Yeah, I mean, the litigants and the families are going to sue everybody, and the government obviously has deep pockets. I understand the entertainer is fairly wealthy. If it goes to court, which I would be surprised if it did, there most certainly be punitive damages if they brought anybody in with an IQ above their shoe size and knows anything about emergency planning, because it was so unreasonable and so reckless. And of course, if it's simple negligence, they're entitled to compensatory damages. If it's gross negligence, it's punitive damages that there's no insurance to cover. So I don't think anybody who knows anything about our profession can look at that event and argue that it was any other than gross negligence.
And just going back to the incident, it just from reading the some of the accounts of people who were there, it sounded like they didn't have enough personnel. I don't know if there's a formula that is looked at where we say, okay, we have X number of people, so that means we need this many security officers and this many EMTs or paramedics. But there was one account of a woman who actually was crushed to some degree by the crowd, lost consciousness, and happened to be a nurse. So after she regained consciousness, she went back into the fray to try to help others. I mean, that was just insane. So it sounded to me like they didn't have enough people there, just not enough at all.
Well, and by the nurse waking up and helping people, that's protection by accident versus program protection. And the issue of how many people and what assets you need is exactly why you need a security professional that knows what they're doing. Because the truth is that every venue, every facility has their own unique risk profile. And it depends where it's located, what kind of entertainer you're going to have, how people are going to be configured. So you have to understand what you're trying to protect and how, and then work backwards with a plan. And yeah, there's formularies, but you have to adapt your plan to the environment and not think that a boilerplate plan will just work for everything, because it won't. So really, risk management is sort of half science and half art. And that's where, an experienced person coming in that can work with the public and the private sector in advance, so that if X happens, we know what the Y response is going to be. And, what's the role of the private sector people, the role of the public sector people, and everybody has to know that in advance. And people seldom do that because they just rather take the risk and hope that nothing happens. And chances are not much will happen. So it's it's seen as a high impact but low probability event. But the fact is, when you get 50,000 people, it's sort of a high probability event. At a very minimum, if you don't have sections where you have clear zones, and you have somebody needs an ambulance in the middle of the crowd, how do you get them there? And that was one of the part of the problems in with the Las Vegas shooting. So what the promoters did is created a kill box. So people came in, they didn't know where the exit was. There was nobody directing them. And you have to have somebody that has overwatch of that, so they can cut off the mic of the entertainer, take control, and instruct people what they need to do. And that's part and parcel of the plan. And you have to have that, because if something goes south, and it normally does, you have to be able to react in a responsible and timely manner. And that just didn't happen here, and it was compounded by a lack of planning and coordination.
And here's the other thing that I was reading, is that apparently at some of his other, Travis Scott's previous concerts, that there had been issues with crowd control. I mean, that anybody who had done any little bit of research would have been able to find that out. And that could have given them a clue, like, hey, maybe it's possible that this could happen again. So let's do something about it. Let's prepare for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, part of the planning process is what has happened in other like events, not only with Mr. Scott, but just other venues. There's best practices developed, and you have to rely on those best practices to apply them to the event that you're planning for. But that's absolutely part of it. Okay, so there needs to be an after action report really for any major event. What went right? What went wrong?
Right. What
can we improve upon? And if there's no AAR done, and that AAR is not shared with other people, then you have lessons learned, but not lessons applied, unless that data is shared with people who can make an impact on future events to help protect people when they otherwise wouldn't be protected. And of course, there's just plain old common sense. You don't put 50,000 people in the middle of a crowd, or as a crowd, and just to hope that everything turns out okay and then nothing bad will happen. That's absurdity. Really. It's just absurdity.
Yeah, I'd love to see that after action report. Hopefully it is made public. But I was just thinking about there are arenas that hold far more, you know, like Wembley Stadium in the UK. What's that, over 100,000, I believe. And there's places, there used to be an event, I don't know if it's still around anymore, called Rock in Rio, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And I believe that you could, I think they put 200,000 in there, but you don't hear of things like this happening. So yeah, I don't know what the answer is. That possibly at those events they had a plan. Yeah, and there was a disconnect, it seemed, you know, between when stuff started happening at the Travis Scott show, you know, that there wasn't word that was, they didn't get word to him to stop. You know, he continued on for another 40 minutes, I believe. And I guess again, that's
and that's part of that. It's a lack of anyone being in charge of the event from a safety and security and risk management standpoint. You cannot have the entertainer have that role. You have to have a separate individual that their only job is to keep track of what's going on. I mean, I don't think he would have continued had he known, you know, there were people injured. In fact, at one point you heard him say, "Hey, we need an ambulance over here." Well,
right.
You know, that's fine, but how did they get there? And if you don't think about that in advance, it's too late once it's happened to start thinking about it, because then it's a crisis.
And he may not even have realized the gravity of it, the magnitude of what was going on. So yeah, like you were saying, that, you know, that the person that you know, that's at the top, that's the risk management or the safety and security person, also needs to be given the latitude to be able to, the power to stop the event. And that I don't know if that was the case here, but you know, you could just see promoters not being willing to give that power away. Like, no, the show must go on, as the saying is. You know, why would we want to relinquish power to this person who's just going to be the no fun police?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right in that situation. You have to have somebody that has control of the lighting, of the microphone, you know, cut off switch to the entertainer, you know, that can literally take control of the situation. Maybe you have, you know, side lights, you know, that are turned on, so the crowd gets lit up, you know, and you cut the mic, and then you as the incident commander, talk to the crowd. You know, this is an emergency incident. Excuse me. Here's what we need to happen. And if you have those buffer zones, those clear zones, and other things occurring, that's that coordinated effort that allows both private sector and public safety people to mutually respond in a seamless and integrated way to minimize the injury and death of any individual or individuals. They just didn't have that. You know, personally, if I was asked to do that, to do a security plan, I wouldn't do it unless there was a control mechanism that you could sort of control the event. And you can sort of analogize it to the fire department. So you have a business, you own the building, you own everything in it, but if there's a fire, when the fire department shows up, the fire chief is in charge.
Right.
The building owner is no longer in charge. The fire chief is in charge. and the fire chief stays in charge until the fire chief relinquishes that control. And so the same kind of thing needs to occur at concerts. There needs to be that override mechanism, and safety and security need to be more important than listening to music. And it just doesn't appear that was the case here.
Yeah. You know, Tom, you brought it up briefly, the tragedy in Las Vegas, the mass shooting. And you were saying to me that you saw some similarities, some parallels between these two incidents. Was there anything that you wanted to add as far as that is concerned about the similarities?
Well, the crowd wasn't near the size at the Las Vegas shooting. But as an expert in that case, what I saw is sort of the same thing where you cram everybody into one space. People are not aware necessarily where the entrances and exits are. There was nobody taking control when the people ran off the stage at the Las Vegas shooting. People just sort of on their own. So nobody was directing them. There were no clear zones, no buffer zones, no interoperability. In fact, they had an event company doing the security, and they also had that same company at the Mandalay Bay. And the guards at the Mandalay Bay didn't even have interoperability, communications interoperability with their same company who were doing the Route 91 Music Festival. So they didn't even have intercompany interoperability, let alone interoperability with public safety. And so, I mean, I kind of hate to keep hitting on this, but having interoperability is absolutely critical in a seamless response that that has the best chance of protecting people. And so it's so simple, yet it seems to be so complicated. So anything security-wise is seen as getting in the way,
right?
When in fact people need to stop looking at it as getting in the way. They need to look at it as an integral part of the planning and execution of the event.
Absolutely, and I can tell you that that's the case here with the York County Fair. It's just it's integrated, and it's like one of the keys to having a successful fair. That's the way it's looked at here.
One of the other things I really like about the NEMS protocol is it's an all hazards kind of model. In other words, if you have an emergency medical event, if you have an active shooter, if there's a fire that breaks out, if you have the meteor that comes down and falls out of the sky, it's all hazards. So it really doesn't matter what the crisis is. It's malleable enough to respond to any crisis and handle anything in the best way possible. And so I would just urge anybody involved in safety and security to become NEMS compliant. The NEMS courses are free. They're really, really good. If you don't have public-private partnerships, reach out to your public sector partners. If you're going into an area and planning a concert, first thing you should do is get a hold of the police chief, the fire chief. Don't forget emergency manager. Emergency managers are one of the hardest working but underappreciated groups in the public safety sphere. Public works, for barriers, for roads, that kind of thing. So you have to have all those partners at the table to properly plan in advance. And if you don't, when something bad happens, there's going to be something missed. And when there's something missed, usually people get hurt or die needlessly. And so just do the right thing in advance and make sure you have what you need. It's too simple.
Yeah. Oh God. I hope we don't have to have this conversation again, Tom. I really don't. But hopefully, people can learn from it. Learn from this tragedy, and to prevent it from ever happening again.
Well, I know there's at least one, and I think two after action reports on the Las Vegas shooting. I think one through the fire department, one through the Las Vegas Metro Police. I would urge people to get a hold of those, to read them, to see what went wrong, and to integrate the lessons learned and to apply them with events that they're involved in. There's probably going to be an after action report on this event through the fire department or the emergency management, maybe the police department, maybe a joint one. But those after action reports are normally public, and they're very, very valuable. In military, we have this saying that there's a lot of lessons learned, but not a lot of lessons applied. And that's because the information we've learned doesn't get in the hands of people who can then integrate that into the planning of the next event. So lessons learned are only historical information unless you can actually put it in play and use that as a part of the planning process to prevent things from happening in the future to the best of your ability. So,
Absolutely.
these AARs, after action reviews or after action reports, a lot of valuable information in there about what went wrong, what went right. And that's a good template, to start with for any event planning, whether it's, 50 people at a fair or 10,000 people at a fair. Every life is precious and life deserves to be protected.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. Couldn't agree more. And yeah, hopefully we can all get a look at that after action report. Hopefully they do make it public. Tom, I just want to thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Appreciate your expertise in this. And hopefully somebody will get something out of this discussion and also the AAR, and yeah, we can move on and not have it happen again.
And if anybody wants to contact me, certainly I'll share any information I have. I would also urge people to get the AAR from the Marjorie Stoneman shooting because it talks a lot about the interoperability and the communications breakdown. The police officers from one agency couldn't talk to police officers in the other agency, both responding, so they had to use hand signals because they didn't have radio interoperability because of a poor system. So I would urge people to get that AAR too.
Sorry, Tom, from which incident?
It's a Marjorie Stoneman high school in Florida, the shooting.
Oh, okay.
Where I think Brevard County and Coral Springs and other, that's where the deputy sheriff let people die and didn't go engage the shooter.
Right. Yep. No, I'm with you now. I couldn't remember the name of the school.
Yeah, there's very valuable lessons on communication interoperability in there. Very valuable lesson, and those are so easy to solve. It's an easy solve, so it's not difficult.
Gotcha. Thanks again, Tom. Really appreciate it. And
Thanks,
I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Okay.